Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 72nd episode of the Inbox. Starting off with a question from Oxy saying, are dead or abandoned ships going to be persistent in the verse? Say I abandoned my constellation to save my life while doing a trade run, the enemy loots my ship and its supplies, and then just leaves it there. Would my constellation still be there for other people to see if I fly back to the area down the road? I can see how the verse would get clustered by this, but just a thought. Yeah, so they kind of hit on this a little bit ago, trying to figure out what level of persistent items are going to actually end up having. You know, for example, like bullet casings, from ballistics weapons aren't going to persist very long. But a ship actually sitting on a landing pad is going to persist for a lot longer. It's not going to be indefinite, and NPCs are going to end up kind of playing the cleaning crew in a way. So I think what's going to happen is your constellation would probably end up sitting there for a while for people to come and see, and I don't think it's going to randomly just disappear from the verse. They may end up doing that, but they may end up putting in an in-game way that actually happens. So maybe your ship sits there for long enough and an NPC crew happens to come by, a reclaimer may end up eating it, or some pirates may end up stealing it, or something like that. I think there's going to be in-game things that have consequences, so you may end up seeing an NPC flying your constellation later on down the line or something like that. So there's a couple different ways they can approach it. They haven't talked specifically about this situation, so I think it's probably going to be two-tiered. It's going to sit there for a little while, giving you a chance to probably get back to it unless somebody else happens across it first. And then past that, it's probably going to be an NPC may do something with it that helps to clean things up. Or if no one happens across it, then what we may see is the server just says, you know what, it's been long enough, we need to clear resources for other things, boom, it disappears. That's kind of my hunch there. David Foles says, question for the inbox, what do you think about nonviolent interactions with the advocacy will be like? I.e., can I get arrested for something and go to space jail? Will I lose my flight stairs and exceeding port speed? Can I get pulled over and ticketed for a busted taillight? Or can I get a source parking ticket for towed for parking in a red zone? The interactions with the advocacy are going to be kind of varied, to be honest with you. If you're not actually, doing violent crimes, they're probably not going to try and come and kill you or get you to stand down. There's probably going to be some restrictions in place. Like an armistice zone, for example. Today, the weapons are actually locked. You can't use your weapons in an armistice zone. That may end up changing once persistence and reputation comes around, and it may just be it's illegal to do those things. And if you end up using a weapon in that space, then all of a sudden the advocacy is going to swoop in and try and take action. There may be speed limits that are in place to avoid collisions. That may be something. Or there may be a level of, we did have a collision and now we need to file an insurance claim. So now the advocacy is getting involved there. Or, minor things like you're caught smuggling. Yeah, you're probably going to get tossed in jail for a little bit, or you're going to get a fine. There's going to be different interactions, and they're not always going to be violent unless you protest. If you get into a situation where you're like, nope, I'm not willing to deal with the fine or the advocacy, I'm going to just run, well, then you're probably going to be a wanted person, and you're going to end up having consequences. So, consequences can be minor, as in fines or potentially a little bit of jail time. They can be really severe, i.e. being dead or maybe wanted and having other players getting to take out bounties on you. So I think it's just going to kind of depend on what your crime was and then how severe the punishment is. C4Po says, is this where I ask questions? I'm going to ask one anyway. Yep, it's the right place. I have a BMM CCU tucked away, but I'm refusing to upgrade until I see the final product. I feel like the Merchantman may end up being a prime target for pirates in the persistent universe, but based on its potential wealth, cargo type, and size. The question is, from where the ships sit today, what ships would you consider to be the best targets for pirates? So I think you're probably in the right state of mind as far as waiting to see the final product. That being said, we did get some more information on the ship now, and it does seem to be it's said to be about the Polaris size, so that's an increase from about 100 meters to about 155 meters. So the ship has grown significantly. Now, as far as your CCU that's tucked away, hopefully it's actually active and not something that you have to unmelt. Otherwise, it's going to end up having an additional cost associated with getting that back out of unmelt. It's going to be targeted because it's expensive. It's probably carrying cargo. That being said, it's a known blockade runner. It's supposed to have good shields, good armor, and it's supposed to be really fast. So it's going to be a hard target to actually deal with. But from your original question, what would be prime targets for pirates? It really just depends. I think it's less about the ships and more about what they do and what their current fleet composition is. A whole series, for example, let's just use a whole sea since it's supposed to be the most common ship. if a whole sea is unescorted, it is a loot pinata. There is a lot of cargo on there. It's not fast. It's going to have very limited options on fighting back. So a solo whole sea is going to be something that a lot of people are going to be like, yep, we're jumping all over that. That same whole sea, though, if it's escorted by 4 Sabers, a Redeemer, and a Retaliator, or even just a whole sea and a Polaris, something like that, that's going to be a much harder target to deal with. But, then you can look at it in a different way, and you'll use a Banu Merchantman, for example, and say, a Banu Merchantman by itself, again, is going to be a prime target, but it has a better chance of running and surviving than something like a Hull does. So the Hull by itself is going to be a more likely target than the Banu Merchantman. So it's less about the ship itself, and it's more about the situation. You could take, an Idris, for example, and say, this Idris is carrying a little bit of the most valuable cargo in the game. People know that. People want that. If that Idris is alone, and then somebody's bringing in Polarises and electronic warfare ships and fighters and basically everything, well, that Idris is going to all of a sudden be a very prime target because of what it's carrying, and the fact that the overwhelming force that's being brought, the Idris isn't really much of a threat at that point. So it's more about a game of like rock, paper, scissors, and weighing the competition between the ships as opposed to what ship it is individually. LJH says, what happens if a ship jumps away while leaving the snub fighter, for example, the Merlin, behind? Will the player controlling it die? No, the player itself would persist in that space. Now, the problem you're going to have is that player does not have a jump engine or a quantum drive on that ship, so it's going to have to basically fly, using its top speed to try and get anywhere, and with the scope and size of these systems, it's going to be pretty impossible for it to get to a location without running out of fuel, most likely, or just the player dying of old age. So, it's not just some arbitrary you've left your mothership so you die type of situation, but chances are if the ship jumps away while leaving the snub fighter behind, it's probably because there's an engagement, and it was an engagement they were going to lose. So they made the calculated decision that they were going to risk the Merlin, leave it behind to save the mothership. And in that situation, yeah, the Merlin is probably going to die, or the player maybe kind of can opened her out of that ship, and they may just be left floating there while someone steals the Merlin, something like that. So there's not an arbitrary reason why the player is going to die, but it's more about the situation that you're leaving them in, and if they have a situation to survive that. Gears Goon says, do you think the Carrack would work as a cargo transport? It has a cargo hold of 1,500. Some people mentioned that it wouldn't be able to make money from it due to cost of operating the ship. It's always going to be a operational cost versus potential profit situation for everything you do in the game. So if you are carrying a lot of high value cargo that's going to get you a lot of money on the end, yeah, it would work as an effective cargo ship. It's got some things that are beneficial from a cargo perspective. It's got long range, it's decently armored, it should have decent speed, it's got good sensors to avoid potential threats that are coming. So I think the Carrack would work as a cargo transport. That being said, I'm not holding my breath that 1,500 ends up staying. That feels like a lot of cargo to me for what the size of the ship is. Now, every ship seems to grow whenever it ends up reaching implementation, and if that's the case, then that number may increase. But it's also kind of weird the way that it carries its cargo. It's in those detachable pods at the bottom as opposed to actually having like a cargo hold. I think that's going to cause some potential detriments to actually running as cargo, especially with loading and unloading. I think it's really more about carrying what you need for the operation or for your exploration fleet. But there's nothing there that's going to stop it from doing cargo. Now, it's never going to be as good as something like a Hull series or something that's really designed to be a cargo ship, but it's got some attributes that make it beneficial in that role. So it can do it, but it's probably not ideal. And then it kind of just depends. That 1,500, for example, if you compare that to, I guess a Hull C is probably the best bet there, because a Hull B is about half of that. So if we're talking about a Hull C, you're talking about a ship that requires, like maybe 2 people. And it's going to carry about 3 times the cargo that you actually can carry on the Carrack. If you're talking about the Carrack, you've got that 1,500, which is, about 3 times less than what the Hull C can do, but you have to have a much larger crew. You have to have the pilot, the turret gunners, the jump or the little snub ship pilot. Now you can get away with less than that, but you're not going to be fully operational. So there's going to be more cost. So you're getting less profit and carrying less cargo at the same time. Scotter Pop says, anyone know if CIG's commented on the dropship mechanics yet? What will be the benefit of strapping a gear and stowing a weapon, or strapping into a seat and stowing a weapon versus just standing in a ship? Well, I think what we're going to see is mostly surrounding atmosphere and combat. And we can kind of extrapolate based on what we know about cargo. They say that cargo that's not secured, when being flown around and shot at and those types of things, can bounce around and do damage to the cargo and the ship. I think if we say that you've got a person just sitting or standing in the middle of a cargo bay waiting to be dropped, if that ship's taking fire and is having to take evasive action, you're probably going to get rattled around and probably get damage to your player or maybe even killed. And that probably gets even worse when you start talking about being in atmosphere. When you're in a ship, you've got kind of the benefit of that gravity that's associated with the ship, so you're fine. But I'm wondering, because it's 0G in the artificial gravity, I'm wondering what happens when you actually get in the atmosphere. Like, let's say you're doing a drop operation on a planet. I'm wondering if that's going to make a more severe situation. And now when you do let's say you do a spin or something, then maybe the player leaves the ground and ends up being thrown around the ship. So I don't know what specifically is going to be there, but there's going to be some level of benefit. And I think it's going to have to do with the damage that's sustained through flying and evasive maneuvers. David Nunez says, "Hey STL, I enjoy your content, keep it up, thank you. I have a question: when the game hits full release, how much do you think it'll cost and what would be the starter ship for people that are purchasing that version?" So I think what we're going to see is probably AAA standard cost. It's going to be probably about $60. And I think it's going to be mostly what you see today. Someone can probably start out with like an Aurora or a Mustang. They may introduce a couple options at higher tiers, but I don't think it's going to be like today where you're actually able to purchase larger ships as part of those packages. I think $60 still makes sense. It's probably going to, at $60, it's probably going to include, both the persistent universe and the campaign. Then the campaign's going to be adding on cost later on down the line. The other alternative is they may say, okay, it's going to now be $60 to get into the persistent universe or $60 to get into the campaign, and you can pay the additional $15 to get into the other. So there may be a price bump at release. My gut says that they're going to want to target as many people, and that AAA cost of about $60 is probably what's going to stick around. And our last question today is from Sketchy, a patron question. He says, what do you think non-lethal play will look like both in space and on ground? Well, in space, I'm assuming we're talking mostly combat non-lethal. So we're not talking about cargo or exploration or anything like that. And I think that most of what you're going to see is disablement of ships or threats. Ideally what happens is you don't have to fire a ship and you get or fire a weapon and you get compliance from the other person. But if they're not going to do that, then you have to take some sort of offensive action. And then if you're not wanting to do lethal play, you're either going to have to target components on the ships with damaging weapons, or what you're going to have to do is use things like distortion cannons, EMPs, data spike missiles to try and disable that ship. On ground, it's going to be a little bit different. And the only thing we've really seen on this so far has been the advocacy tools that came with the Cutlass Blue, primarily like a baton and like handcuffs and stuff like that. So I think what you're more likely going to see in regards to that is going to be focused on, you can beat somebody but you're not killing them, or you can put them in handcuffs and then moving them along is going to be an easier task. Maybe we end up getting stun type of situations, but we also know that bodies are going to be taking damage to certain parts. So you could technically shoot somebody in the leg with a lethal weapon but not cause lethal damage and end up getting them disabled to a point to where you could move around. So that's it for this episode of The Inbox. If you guys have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned for more, and have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.